If you were standing on a desolate ridge in the Kolyma mountain range in the late 1940s, looking out over the endless white wasteland of the Soviet Far East, the first thing you would notice wasn't the cold. You expect the cold in Siberia. What would catch you off guard was the taste. Even through the thick wool of a face mask, the air had a strange, lingering sweetness to it. It was a faint, metallic tang on the back of your throat, like you had been sucking on a copper coin. That sweet taste wasn't a trick of the mountain air. It was the flavor of your own destruction. It was the ionizing breath of the earth itself. You were standing in the Valley of Death, at a place called Butugychag, and that taste meant you were already dying. We often talk about the Cold War as a battle of brilliant scientists in white lab coats, calculating trajectories and splitting atoms in sterile laboratories. We think of the towering mushroom clouds and the sleek, polished missiles. But for the Soviet Union to enter the atomic age, it didn't just need physics, it needed fuel, it needed uranium. And in the paranoid, frantic years after Hiroshima, Stalin didn't have time for safety protocols or sophisticated machinery. He had something else, an endless supply of human beings. Welcome to the life of an atomic slave. In this story, we are going to look at why being sent to the special ore mines of the Gulag was considered a fate far more terrifying than a bullet to the back of the head. We will look at the invisible fire that ate men from the inside out, the psychological horror of a prison where the very air was your executioner, and the grim medical experiments conducted on those who didn't die fast enough. You might think you could survive a labor camp. You might think you could endure the hunger and the lash. But in the uranium mines, the camp wasn't the thing that killed you. The atom was. To understand the nightmare, you first have to understand the desperation. By 1945, the Soviet Union was a victor in ruins, and suddenly, they were trailing behind. The Americans had the bomb. Stalin needed his own, and he needed it now. The secret police chief, Lavrenti Beria, was put in charge of the atomic project. He looked at the map and saw the Kolyma region, a place so remote and so lethal that it had always been a dumping ground for the forgotten. Imagine a mountain of jagged, dark rock rising out of the permafrost. This wasn't a factory, it was a meat grinder. The prisoners sent here weren't told they were mining uranium. That word was a state secret. They were told they were mining special ore, or sometimes just tin. No, they knew something was wrong from the moment they arrived. In a normal gold mine, the guards were brutal, but they were present. In the uranium shafts, the guards stayed back. They stood at the entrances with dogs, refusing to go inside. They knew what the prisoners didn't. The first thing that broke a man in the uranium mines was the sensory shift. You wake up at 4 a.m. in a wooden barrack where the walls are covered in an inch of thick frost. You are sleeping on a wooden plank with 3 other men huddled for warmth. You put on your boots, which are frozen solid and have to be beaten against the floor to make them pliable. You are given a bowl of watery soup and a piece of bread that is half sawdust. But as you walk toward the mine entrance, you feel a strange buzzing energy in the air. You descend into the shaft. There is no ventilation. There are no respirators. There are no lead-lined suits. You are wearing a thin quilted cotton jacket that is already shredded. Your tool is a hand drill or a simple pickaxe. As you strike the rock, a fine gray dust fills the air. It's beautiful in a way. It sparkles in the dim light of your lamp. But as you breathe, you are pulling millions of microscopic shards of radioactive dust deep into your lungs. This dust doesn't just sit there. It emits alpha particles. Imagine millions of tiny, invisible knives vibrating inside your chest, slicing through your DNA, shredding the blueprints of your cells. By noon, that metallic taste is back. It's thick now, coating your tongue like a layer of grease. You feel a phantom fever that doesn't show on a thermometer. The work is exhausting because the air is thin and poisoned with radon gas. You are gasping for breath, and every deep breath is another nail in your coffin. If you stop, The overseer's club finds your kidneys, so you keep swinging the pick, feeding the machine with your own marrow. The biological transformation was the core of the horror. In a standard camp, you died of starvation or a bullet. Here, you rotted while you were still walking. After 2 weeks, your hair starts to fall out in clumps. You wake up and find a circle of hair on your pillow. Then come the sores. Radiation destroys the body's ability to heal. A tiny scratch from a sharp rock doesn't scab over. It turns into a gray, weeping ulcer. By the next week, that ulcer has grown, eating into the muscle. You can see your own tendons, white and pulsing. But there is no blood because your circulatory system is collapsing. Your immune system is gone. A common cold became a systemic shutdown. Then come the teeth. This is the moment survivors remembered with the most visceral terror. You try to chew your daily ration of black bread, bread that is frozen and hard as a brick. You hear a sickening crack. It's not the bread. You spit out a mouthful of blood and 3 of your own teeth. The radiation has simply dissolved the bone of your jaw. Your gums turn a bruised, necrotic purple. You spend the rest of your short life sipping watery soup because your mouth is a graveyard of loose bone and exposed nerves. The hygiene was a secondary nightmare. In the depths of the mine, there were no latrines. The men went where they stood. The radioactive dust mixed with human waste to create a toxic, steaming sludge on the floor of the tunnels. You were constantly covered in a film of quote, _0, underscore. The smell wasn't just the smell of a prison. It was the smell of a body that was fermenting from the inside out. Then there was the uranium cough. It started as a tickle, then a dry hack, and finally a violent spasm that would throw you to the ground. You weren't just coughing up phlegm, you were coughing up bits of your own lungs. But the most calculated part of this hell was the secrecy. In other camps, you might get a letter from home. In the quote, 2 camps, you were a ghost. You were part of the quote, 3. You were forbidden from using the word, quote, 4. If a prisoner was caught telling a newcomer that the rocks were poisoned, he disappeared. And disappearing in a place like Butugychag was a specialized process. Historians who visited the ruins of these camps decades later found something like a plot from a horror movie. In the cemetery of the camp, they found hundreds of skulls with clean surgical holes drilled into the side. The camp wasn't just a mine, it was a laboratory. The Soviet scientists knew the prisoners were dying, but they wanted to see what the ice atom did to the human brain. You weren't just a slave, you were a lab rat in a quilted jacket, providing data for the military-industrial complex. When the ship of the Soviet state moved forward, it was powered by this invisible fire. Some men lasted a month. The strong ones might last 3. No one lasted a year. The ice atom was 100% effective. But even death wasn't an escape. In the permafrost, bodies don't decompose. They are preserved in a frozen state of agony. Thousands of these atomic slaves were buried in shallow pits with nothing more than a wooden stake. But the earth in Kolyma is restless. The constant freezing and thawing acts like a slow-motion conveyor belt. Over the decades, the permafrost began to push the bodies back up. Skulls, rib cages, and tattered rags of Gulag uniforms began to sprout from the ground like a grisly harvest. If you walk through the Valley of Death today, you are walking on the literal remains of the men who built the Soviet bomb. The worst part of the life of a uranium slave wasn't the pain. It was the realization that your sacrifice was for nothing. You weren't building a city or defending your home. You were digging the grave of the world. You were extracting the material that, if ever used, would turn the entire planet into a version of the very mine you were dying in. Imagine the psychological weight of that. You were standing in a dark, wet hole. Your teeth are falling out. Your skin is sloughing off in gray sheets. And you know that the rock in your hand is the most evil substance on the face of the planet. You know that no one is coming for you. You are a shadow, working for a shadow. in a valley that doesn't officially exist. The quote to the famous Gulag system of cheating on work quotas to survive didn't work here. You couldn't quote 3 radiation. In a gold mine, you could work slower when the guard wasn't looking. In the uranium mine, the silent killer was in the air even while you rested. Resting didn't save you, it just gave the atom more time to finish the job. As the 1950s rolled on and the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first hydrogen bomb, the demand for ore only grew. The camps became even more efficient. More men, more pickaxes, more deaths. The quote, _4_ were the ultimate disposable resource. They were cheaper than coal and more silent than the grave. When we look back at the history of the 20th century, we see the grand parades in Red Square and the shiny missiles. But the real foundation of that power was in the quote, _5_ camps. It was in the sweet taste of the air, the blood on the frozen bread, and the holes in the skulls of the forgotten. The galley slave of the 16th century had the hope of a shipwreck or a rescue. The prisoner in the uranium gulag had nothing. He was trapped in a biological countdown. He was a battery being drained to power a nightmare. So, if you think your environment is stressful, just remember the Valley of Death. Remember the men who stood waist-deep in radioactive sludge, breathing in their own demise, just so a flag could fly a little higher. Because in the uranium mines, there was no adventure, and there was no freedom. There was only the cold, the dust, and the slow metallic crawl toward the end. For the atomic slave, the only true mercy was the moment the cough finally stopped, and the Kolyma wind took what was left of his soul. In the world of the ice atom, death wasn't just a release. It was the only thing the state couldn't take from you. It was the only true freedom in a land of frozen shadows.